What in the seven hells are you? Cale froze, hand hovering over the diagnostic panel he'd come to check. Dangling from the ceiling conduits of his cargo bay, like some kind of impossible, bioluminescent chandelier, was her. Long, impossibly slender limbs were tucked close to a torso covered in scales that shifted from obsidian to deep violet in the dim emergency lighting. Silvery, almost liquid light pulsed along intricate lines tracing her form, brightest along a cascade of prehensile tendrils that fanned out from her shoulders and spine, anchoring her effortlessly to the metalwork above. One of those tendrils, ending in delicate, feathery filaments, was currently prodding No, tasting the casing of a defunct plasma injector he'd salvaged weeks ago. She made a low, resonant humming sound, a vibration Cale felt more in his teeth than heard with his ears. Her head tilted, large, luminous eyes the color of nebulae focusing on him. There was no discernible mouth in the human sense, just a smooth plane below those vast eyes, yet somehow he felt her curiosity like a physical touch. "Get down," he tried, gesturing vaguely downwards. It felt profoundly stupid. The humming intensified slightly, shifting pitch. One tendril detached, snaking through the air towards him with unsettling grace, its tip glowing faintly. Cale instinctively stepped back, bumping into a crate of stabilizer gyros. "Whoa, hey, personal space lady, or whatever you are." The tendril paused, hovering inches from his chest. The light patterns on her scales flickered, swirling faster. He could almost interpret it as amusement. Hesitantly, he raised a hand, palm out. "Look, I don't know how you got onto the rusty comet, but this isn't a passenger liner, or a zoo." The tendril retracted slightly, coiling back towards her main body. She shifted her grip on the conduits, lowering herself with fluid, silent movements until her feet, long, triple-jointed and ending in surprisingly delicate claws, touched the deck plating. She was taller than him by a head, easily. The humming softened, becoming a low thrum that resonated pleasantly against his skull. She tilted her head again, those huge eyes blinking slowly. Then one slender, scaled hand reached out, not with a tendril this time, but her actual fingers, long, elegant, tipped with small, dark claws. She gently tapped the center of his chest, right over his heart. The touch sent a weird jolt through him, like static electricity mixed with warmth. The silvery lines on her skin flared brightly at the point of contact. Well, this is new, he thought, trying desperately to keep his face neutral despite the adrenaline spike. Usually, stowaways just try to steal my rations. She didn't speak, not in any way he recognized, but the intensity of her gaze and the persistent, low-frequency hum felt like a question, or maybe a demand. Cale took another cautious step back, breaking the contact. The warmth faded instantly, leaving a strange echo. "Right, okay, communication breakdown, let's start simple." He pointed at himself. "Cale, human." He tapped his chest again. "Me, Cale," he gestured towards her. "You." Her eyes followed his movements, the light patterns on her scales swirling like captured galaxies. She mirrored his gesture, tapping her own chest just below the point where her collarbones would be if she had them. The hum changed again, becoming a series of distinct melodic pulses. It wasn't words, but it felt like a name, or an attempt at one. "Xylia," he guessed, trying to mimic the rhythm. The lights on her flared, a bright, almost joyful pulse that traveled down her limbs and tendrils. The resonant hum spiked in affirmation, vibrating the deck plates beneath his boots. "Xylia. Okay, progress, maybe." She took a step towards him, closing the distance he'd created. Her curiosity seemed utterly boundless and completely devoid of any sense of personal boundaries he understood. One of her shoulder tendrils unfurled again, slower this time, moving towards his face. He flinched instinctively. "Hey, watch the merchandise." Xylia paused, the tendril hovering near his cheek. The light patterns dimmed slightly, the humming softening. Was that apology or just recalibration? He sighed, running a hand through his already messy hair. "Look, Xylia, you can't just hang around in my cargo bay licking old engine parts. Why are you here? Are you running from someone?" Her luminous eyes didn't waver. The humming remained steady, a low, resonant query. He had the distinct impression she understood the intent behind his words, even if the language was meaningless. She tilted her head towards the sealed cargo bay door, then back at him. Then, with surprising speed, she darted past him, her movements silent and fluid, towards the cockpit entrance at the far end of the bay. "Hey, wait up!" Kale scrambled after her, dodging crates and loose conduits. She was faster than she looked. By the time he reached the bulkhead door, she was already peering through the reinforced viewport, her tendrils splayed against the transparasteel, her body humming with a focused intensity. He skidded to a halt beside her. What is it?" Outside, only the endless black and the distant sprinkle of stars were visible. Nothing on his short-range sensors had pinged. But Xylia was utterly transfixed, the lights on her skin pulsing slowly, rhythmically. It wasn't alarm, he realized. It was concentration, fascination. She was looking past the stars somehow. Xylia remained pressed against the viewport, her resonant hum a low, steady thrum against the metal bulkhead. Kale leaned closer, trying to see whatever held her attention, but there was nothing but the void. "What are you seeing out there, Sparkles?" he muttered, more to himself than to her. She didn't react verbally, but one of her tendrils detached from the transparasteel and lightly brushed his arm. Again, that strange jolt, less startling this time, more like a gentle electric current. The lights along the tendril brightened where it made contact. He didn't pull away immediately, oddly mesmerized by the sensation and the intricate, shifting patterns on her skin. Was this how she communicated non-verbally? Through touch and light? He cautiously reached out, his fingers hovering over the smooth, cool scales just above her elbow. He hesitated. Touching aliens wasn't generally high on his good ideas for survival list, but she'd touched him first. Twice. He made brief contact. Her scales were surprisingly smooth, cool to the touch, yet radiating a faint inner warmth. The moment his skin met hers, the silvery lines flared and the humming in the room intensified, vibrating deep in his chest. Xylia turned her head sharply, those nebula eyes locking onto his. The intensity was startling. She made a soft, clicking sound, pulling her arm away, though not with any sense of alarm, more like surprise, or maybe processing the input. Okay, so touch was definitely a thing for her. He dropped his hand, feeling suddenly awkward. "Right, boundaries, got it." He backed up a step. "Look, Xylia, as much as I appreciate the silent light show, we need to figure out what to do with you. I'm heading for Port Azure to offload some salvage. Not exactly the kind of place for," he gestured vaguely at her glowing, tendrilled form. "Tourists, especially conspicuous ones." She turned fully away from the viewport now, facing him. She cocked her head, the long, elegant neck angling in a way that seemed distinctly bird-like, yet entirely alien. The humming started again, softer this time, more inquisitive. She took a step towards him, then paused, as if remembering his earlier reaction. Instead of touching him, one of her tendrils snaked out and gently tapped the worn insignia stitched onto the shoulder of his flight suit, the faded logo of a long-defunct Kuiper Belt Mining Corp he'd scavenged the suit from. The lights on the tendril pulsed. Then she pointed towards the viewport again, specifically towards a faint nebula cluster barely visible in the distance. The humming shifted, taking on a pattern that felt directional, insistent. Was she from out there, trying to tell him her origin? "That's the Cygnus Veil," Kale said slowly. "It's restricted space, heavy syndicate patrols." Xylia's lights dimmed slightly at the word syndicate, the resonance dropping to a near subsonic level. Definitely a reaction. So running from someone, the syndicate maybe, that complicated things a lot. "Okay," he sighed, "okay, let's assume you're in trouble. Stowing away on a junk hauler like mine is probably not the smartest move, but here we are." He started walking towards the small galley kitchenette built into the forward bulkhead. "Might as well get some synth calf. Want some, whatever it is you consume." Xylia followed him silently, her bare feet making no sound on the deck plates. She watched with intense curiosity as he activated the dispenser, the machine whirring as it produced a steaming mug of dark liquid. He turned to offer it, then stopped, remembering she didn't have a visible mouth. "Right." Xylia tilted her head, then reached out, not for the mug, but for the nutrient paste dispenser next to the calf machine. Her tendrils manipulated the controls with surprising dexterity, extruding a small blob of grayish paste onto her palm. She brought her palm close to her face, and the paste seemed to absorb directly into her skin, leaving no residue. The lights on her hand flared briefly. Well, that answered that question. She looked back at him, the nebula eyes seeming to hold a hint of challenge. The low hum returned, almost playful. He took a sip of his caf. "Show off," he muttered, unable to suppress a small smirk. This coexistence was going to be interesting. Days blurred into a strange rhythm aboard the rusty comet. Cale tried to stick to his routines, system checks, navigation plotting, engine maintenance, while Xylia explored every inch of his small ship with unnerving, silent curiosity. She touched everything. Bulkheads, control panels, wiring conduits, his favorite worn pilot's chair. Sometimes she'd press her palm flat against a surface, humming softly, her lights pulsing as if listening to the ship's inner workings. Occasionally, a tendril would snake out and brush against him as she passed in the narrow confines of the cockpit or corridor, sending that now familiar tingle through his nerves. He'd flinch or sidestep initially, muttering about personal space, but she never seemed offended, merely recalibrating her path, the lights on her skin flickering in what he was starting to interpret as mild amusement. He learned she slept coiled in a corner of the cargo bay, suspended in a hammock woven from her own tendrils, resembling a large, shimmering cocoon. He learned she didn't need much sleep, often remaining motionless but aware, her lights pulsing faintly for long stretches. Communication remained rudimentary, a mix of gestures, pointed fingers, and her shifting patterns of light and resonance. He figured out certain hums meant yes or affirmative, others indicated curiosity, and a low, almost inaudible thrum seemed to be contentment. A sudden sharp spike in resonance usually meant alarm or surprise. He tried teaching her basic galactic standard words pointing at objects. Panel. He tapped the console. She'd repeat the gesture, her hum mimicking the cadence but not the sound. Ship. He patted the wall. Again, the mimicry, the resonant translation. It was slow, frustrating, yet oddly compelling. One cycle, while he was trying to recalibrate the finicky atmospheric processor, hunched over an open access panel, she approached silently from behind. He felt the air shift, the faint change in resonance that announced her presence. Before he could say anything, one of her tendrils snaked past his shoulder, the delicate, feathery tip probing unerringly towards a microconnector he'd been struggling to reseat. With a tiny, precise nudge, it clicked into place. The processor whirred to life, green lights flickering on the diagnostic display. Cale stared at it, then slowly turned his head. Xylia was watching him, her nebula eyes wide, the tendril hovering near the connector. "How did you know?" he asked, genuinely baffled. She tilted her head, humming softly. Her other hand came up, tapping the side of her smooth head, then tapping the humming panel. Resonance. Did she hear the misalignment? Before he could puzzle it out further, a proximity alert blared from the cockpit console, sharp, insistent. Cale swore, scrambling out of the cramped access space. "Trouble, stay here." He sprinted towards the cockpit, Xylia a silent shadow right behind him. On the main view screen, a sleek, menacing shape was resolving out of the starfield's sharp angles, dark plating, no visible running lights. Definitely not friendly. Syndicate markings, faint but unmistakable. "Scrap," Cale breathed, slamming his hands onto the controls. "They found us." "Strap in," Cale yelled, not checking if Xylia understood or even could. He yanked the Comet into a hard starboard burn, the old ship groaning in protest. Inertial dampeners strained, pressing him back into his worn pilot seat. The Syndicate cruiser adjusted its trajectory instantly, predicting his move. Warning klaxons blared as their weapon systems locked on. Xylia stood beside his chair, braced against the console, her tendrils splayed wide for balance. Her lights pulsed rapidly, mirroring the flashing red alerts, and the resonant hum spiked to an almost painful intensity. "Can you do anything?" he shouted over the noise, banking sharply to dodge incoming plasma fire that sizzled past the port viewport. "Any secret alien death rays? Fancy shields?" Xylia didn't respond verbally, but two of her longest tendrils shot forward, pressing flat against the navigation console Cale wasn't currently using. The lights on her skin flowed down the tendrils, sinking into the console itself. The screen flickered erratically. "Hey, what are you?" Cale started, but then the short-range sensor display went haywire. Ghost signals bloomed everywhere, multiple comet-shaped signatures scattering across the screen like startled fish. The Syndicate ship hesitated, its targeting lock flickering between the false readings. Whoa, Kale breathed. Ghosting the sensors. Nice trick, Sparkles. He grinned, punching the throttle. Buy me some time. Another volley of plasma fire stitched across their path. Kale threw the ship into a corkscrew dive towards a dense asteroid field looming ahead. It was risky, suicidal, even but better than being target practice in open space. Xylia kept her tendrils pressed to the console, her whole body rigid with concentration, the humming a solid, vibrating wall of sound in the small cockpit. Her lights flared with blinding intensity each time she pulsed the sensor ghosts. Asteroids tumbled past the viewports, ranging from fist-sized pebbles to behemoths that could swallow the comet whole. Kale wrestled with the controls, his knuckles white, sweat stinging his eyes. He threaded the needle between two spinning chunks of rock, the ship's hull scraping against one with a teeth-jarring shriek of metal. Xylia cried out, a sharp, high-pitched trill that cut through the engine roar as the impact sent her stumbling sideways. One of her hands flailed, grabbing his shoulder to steady herself. The contact was electric, not the gentle tingle from before, but a raw surge of energy that shot down his arm, making his muscles clench. Her panic, her focus, her something flooded through the touch, overwhelming his senses for a split second. He felt the ghost signals she was projecting, felt the thrumming asteroids outside, felt the cold calculation of the pursuing ship. It was too much, a sensory overload. He gasped, instinctively pulling back as he navigated another near miss. Xylia snatched her hand away as if burned, her lights flickering wildly. Her nebula eyes were wide, pupils dilated, fixed on him. The resonant hum stuttered, faltered. Had she felt his thoughts, his panic? The shared jolt left an echo, a strange intimacy forged in the heat of battle. There was no time to process it. The Syndicate cruiser, hampered by the sensor ghosts and the debris field, fired blindly. A lucky shot grazed the comet's aft stabilizer. The ship lurched violently, spinning off-axis. Lost maneuvering, Kale yelled, fighting the unresponsive controls. They were tumbling towards a massive, pockmarked asteroid. Xylia launched herself forward, tendrils whipping out, slamming onto multiple control surfaces simultaneously. Thruster overrides, shield modulators, even the emergency coolant regulators. Her humming surged, desperate and powerful, lights blazing. The ship shuddered, groaned, then miraculously stabilized, engines sputtering but holding mere meters from becoming a crater on the asteroid's surface. Kale stared at the controls, then at Xylia, panting. How? She slowly retracted her tendrils, slumping slightly against the console, the intense light dimming to a soft pulse. She looked exhausted, her resonance a low, tired thrum. She glanced at him, then quickly looked away, a ripple of something unreadable embarrassment, vulnerability. Washing across her scales, he let out a long breath. Okay, you can stay. They drifted in the relative safety of the asteroid field's deep shadow, engines powered down, running on minimal life support to mask their energy signature. The rusty comet was battered but intact, thanks largely to Xylia's unexpected intervention. Kale had managed to jury-rig the damaged stabilizer enough for basic maneuvering, but they weren't going anywhere fast. Silence stretched between them in the dimly lit cockpit, thick with unspoken questions and the lingering echo of that shared jolt of panic and awareness during the chase. Kale finally broke it, digging into his emergency rations. He tossed a nutrient bar onto the console near Xylia. Need to keep your strength up, Sparkles. Whatever you did back there took a lot out of you. Xylia looked at the bar, then at him. She picked it up, turning it over in her slender fingers. Instead of absorbing it, she mimicked Kale's earlier gesture, pointing at the bar, then at him, then at herself, her hum a soft, questioning series of pulses. Yeah, food, Kale said, taking a bite of his own bar. Energy, humans eat this stuff. He chewed pointedly. Xylia watched him, fascinated. Then very slowly she brought the bar towards the smooth plane below her eyes. Kale braced himself for the absorption trick, but instead a tiny seam appeared, parting slightly, a mouth. It was small, delicate, almost invisible when closed. She took a minuscule bite of the bar, her equivalent of lips barely moving. Her eyes widened slightly and the lights on her cheekbones flared. The resonant hum spiked with surprise, then settled into a rhythm he was starting to associate with pleasure. Huh, Kale said around his mouthful. So you do have one of those. Xylia chewed slowly, deliberately, then swallowed. She looked at the bar again, then back at him, a soft, appreciative hum vibrating the air. It felt companionable, almost normal, despite the glowing, tendrilled alien sitting across from him eating rations meant for Terran digestive systems. They ate in silence for a few minutes. Kale found himself watching the subtle shifts of light on her scales, the way her tendrils coiled loosely on the console, occasionally twitching. He was intensely aware of her proximity, of the lingering static charge in the air between them since that desperate touch. He cleared his throat. So, syndicate hunters, means you're probably more trouble than you're worth. Xylia finished the bar, the seam vanishing as quickly as it appeared. She met his gaze, her nebula eyes steady. Her resonance deepened, losing its earlier lightness. She tapped her chest, then made a sweeping gesture towards the Cygnus Veil Nebula, still a faint smear outside the viewport. Then she made a sharp, cutting motion with her hand, followed by a low, mournful hum. Exiled, hunted. She pointed at the faded Mining Corp logo on his shoulder again, then tapped her own chest, then pointed back out at the void, specifically towards the direction the syndicate ship had come from. The hum became insistent, questioning. Was she asking if he was running too? Something like that, Kale admitted, looking away. Let's just say I prefer my freedom. Owe some people some money. Pissed off the wrong corporate middle manager. The usual story, he shrugged. Means we're stuck together for a while, looks like. Port Azure is definitely out now. Too hot. Xylia tilted her head, considering his words or maybe just the tone. One of her tendrils uncoiled, reaching out not towards him this time but hovering in the space between them. The tip glowed softly, pulsing in time with her low hum. It felt like an offering, tentative connection. Kale watched it, his own hand resting on the console nearby. He remembered the jolt, the overload, but also the understanding. The shared moment. He didn't pull back. He didn't reach out either, just held her gaze. The tendril remained, a bridge of light and sound in the quiet cockpit. The air crackled with restrained energy, a different kind of tension than the chase. Desire, sharp and unexpected, curled low in his gut, mingling with a confusing sense of vulnerability. He wanted to know what that touch felt like without the panic, without the adrenaline. Xylia's lights brightened slightly, mirroring the thought, the hum deepening, becoming richer, more complex. She knew. She felt it too. They needed parts. The makeshift stabilizer repair wouldn't hold forever, and their power cells were dangerously depleted after the chase in Xylia's sensor-ghosting display. Kale scanned the nearby systems, filtering for uninhabited, resource-rich planetoids. Xylos, he announced, pointing at a reading on the nav display. Jungle moon. High energy readings, probably geothermal vents we can tap for a quick recharge. Thick atmosphere, good sensor cover. Should be safe enough for a short stop. Xylia leaned closer, her tendrils brushing his arm as she peered at the swirling green and blue image of the moon. She didn't pull back this time, and neither did Kale. The light contact sent a pleasant warmth spreading through him. Her hum was inquisitive, focused on the planetary scan data scrolling across the secondary screen. He explained the plan simply, using gestures and pointing at the ship's depleted power gauge, then the moon, then miming repairs. Xylia seemed to grasp the gist, nodding slowly, her lights pulsing in understanding. Landing on Xylos was like plunging into a primordial soup. Thick, humid air, smelling of damp earth, alien pollen and something metallic, rushed in the moment Kale cracked the entry ramp. Towering, fungal-like trees draped in phosphorescent vines dominated the landscape, casting the jungle floor in an eerie, shifting glow. Strange insect-like calls echoed through the dense foliage. "Stick close," Kale warned, grabbing his multi-tool and a power siphon kit. "This place feels bitey." Xylia followed him down the ramp, her nebula eyes wide, taking in the vibrant, almost overwhelming alien ecosystem. Her tendrils twitched, sampling the air, her lights shifting rapidly as she processed the new sensory input. Her resonance was a low thrum of cautious curiosity. They located a cluster of geothermal vents spewing heated gas not far from the ship, hidden within a rocky ravine choked with bioluminescent moss. Kale set up the power siphon, connecting it to the comet's external charging port. "This'll take a few hours," he said, wiping sweat from his brow. The humidity was intense. Might as well see if we can find some clean water. They followed a network of crystalline streams deeper into the ravine. Xylia moved with a silent grace that Kale envied, her clawed feet finding purchase on slippery rocks, her tendrils occasionally bracing against tree trunks or testing hanging vines. Suddenly she froze, her body going rigid, lights flashing a sharp crimson warning. The resonant hum dropped instantly, replaced by a low, guttural growl that vibrated the air. "What is it?" Kale whispered, reaching for the stun pistol holstered at his thigh. Xylia pointed upwards with a trembling tendril. Coiled on a thick branch overhead, perfectly camouflaged against the bark, was a predator. It resembled a Terran panther but sleeker, six-limbed with interlocking plates of obsidian armor along its back and a maw full of needle-sharp teeth. It was staring right at them, saliva dripping from its jaws. It launched itself from the branch with terrifying speed, a blur of black plating and claws aimed straight for Kale. He fumbled with the stun pistol, knowing he wouldn't be fast enough. But Xylia reacted instantly. She shoved Kale hard, sending him stumbling backwards onto the mossy ground just as the creature landed where he'd been standing. With a shriek that was part fury, part warning, Xylia met the beast head-on. Her tendrils became whips, lashing out with incredible speed and precision, striking the creature's armored flanks. They didn't seem to inflict much damage, but they were distracting, confusing. She dodged its snapping jaws and swiping claws with impossible agility, her movements fluid, primal. The creature roared in frustration, focusing its attack on her. Kale finally got the stunner free, firing a high-intensity bolt that struck the creature's shoulder. It yowled, staggering back, momentarily stunned. Xylia seized the opening. She launched herself forward, not attacking, but wrapping several tendrils around the creature's thick neck, her body pressing close. Her lights flared with blinding white intensity, and the resonant hum surged, becoming a focused, overwhelming wave of sound and energy directed straight into the predator. The creature convulsed, its muscles locking up, then collapsed, unconscious but unharmed. Xylia slowly unwound her tendrils, breathing heavily, her lights dimming, flickering erratically. She turned to Kale, her large eyes finding his. She looked shaken, the adrenaline fatting, leaving behind a raw vulnerability. He scrambled to his feet, heart pounding. "Xylia, are you okay? Did it hurt you?" He reached her side, scanning her for injuries. She seemed unharmed, just depleted. She leaned against him slightly, a soft, shaky hum escaping her. Without thinking, he wrapped an arm around her shoulders, pulling her steady. "You saved my life," he murmured, his voice rough. She looked up at him, her nebula eyes searching his face. Then she gently pressed her palm flat against his chest, right over his heart, just as she had when they first met. This time the connection was different. Not startling, not overwhelming, but deep, resonant. He felt her relief, her exhaustion, the lingering echo of primal fear, and beneath it all a powerful wave of something else. Connection. Protectiveness. Her lights pulsed softly against his skin, a steady, calming rhythm. Her hum deepened, weaving into his own heartbeat, creating a strange, shared harmony. It wasn't sexual, not yet, but it was intensely intimate, a raw stripping away of barriers in the aftermath of shared danger. He held her close, feeling the smooth coolness of her scales, the faint vibration of her resonance, and knew with terrifying certainty that something irreversible had just shifted between them. Back in the relative safety of the comet's cockpit, the jungle's phosphorescent glow filtering through the viewport, the air still thrummed with the residual energy of the encounter. Xylia sat curled in the co-pilot's seat, her lights pulsing softly, her earlier exhaustion replaced by a quiet intensity. Kale finished securing the charging siphon outside, double-checking the seals before re-entering the ship. He found her watching him, her nebula eyes seeming to hold galaxies of unasked questions. He leaned against the doorframe, suddenly unsure how to navigate this new, charged space between them. The casual sarcasm, the guarded distance, they felt flimsy now, inadequate. "You were incredible back there," he said softly, breaking the silence. "Fast, fierce." Xylia tilted her head, her resonant hum a low, questioning vibration. She uncurled slightly, extending a hand towards him, palm up. An invitation. He hesitated for only a moment before stepping closer, taking her offered hand. Her scaled fingers felt cool against his skin, but a deeper warmth radiated from within. The lights on her hand flared where they touched, sending that familiar, pleasant tingle up his arm, but this time it felt grounding, not jarring. She gently tugged him closer until he was standing between her knees, her eyes level with his. The humming intensified, weaving a complex pattern of sound that resonated deep within his bones. It felt like exploration, like curiosity made audible. One of her shoulder tendrils lifted, tracing the line of his jaw with feather-light touches, its tip glowing softly. He shivered, not from cold but from the sheer sensory input. Her touch was alien, yet undeniably intimate. "Xylia," he breathed, his voice hoarse. Her name felt different on his lips now, weighted with significance. She responded with a soft click, her equivalent of a verbal acknowledgement maybe. The tendril continued its exploration, mapping the contours of his face, lingering on his lips. He could feel the faint electrical buzz of her energy, the subtle vibrations of her hum traveling through the point of contact. His own body responded instinctively, leaning into the touch, his eyes fluttering closed for a moment. He wanted this, more than he'd wanted anything in a long time. He opened his eyes to find hers fixed on him, wide and luminous, reflecting the dim cockpit lights. He saw his own reflection in those vast pupils, small and suddenly vulnerable. He reached up, his fingers brushing against the smooth plane below her eyes, tracing the almost invisible seam of her mouth. She went utterly still, her lights flickering rapidly, her hum faltering for a beat before resuming deeper, throatier. He leaned down, slowly, hesitantly, his lips brushing against that seam. It yielded slightly under the pressure, soft and surprisingly warm. He felt her sharp intake of breath, a silent gasp. He pressed a gentle kiss there, a tentative exploration. The response was immediate, overwhelming. Her lights flared, washing the cockpit in brilliant silver. The resonant hum surged, wrapping around him like a physical force, vibrating through his entire body. Her arms came up, scaled hands pressing against his back, pulling him closer. The tendril that had been tracing his face now curled around the back of his neck, sending sparks down his spine. He deepened the kiss, and the seam parted further, allowing him access to the delicate inner warmth. It wasn't like kissing a human. It was stranger, more intense, a direct connection to her energy, her resonance. He felt dizzy, overwhelmed, lost in the flood of alien sensation. Her tendrils moved, exploring his body with electrifying curiosity, tracing the lines of his muscles through his flight suit, sending shivers across his skin. One tendril slipped beneath the hem of his shirt, its cool, feathery tip brushing against his bare stomach. He gasped, arching slightly into the touch. This was fast, intense, utterly consuming. He fumbled with the fastenings of his suit, needing closer contact, needing to feel her scales against his skin. Xylia mirrored his urgency, her own hands exploring the unfamiliar textures of his clothing, her hum rising in pitch, laced with something akin to excitement, maybe even confusion. A thought, absurd and panic-tinged, flashed through Cale's mind as his fingers brushed against the complex structure where her legs joined her torso, feeling the interlocking plates of scale. Wait, you mean it's supposed to fit there? The alienness of her form, the sheer unknown territory, sparked a momentary flicker of human panic amidst the overwhelming desire. He must have tensed, or maybe she sensed the flicker of absurdity through their connection, because her hum hitched, and she pulled back slightly, her nebula eyes wide with question, maybe even a hint of her own panic. The moment stretched, thick with confusion and the lingering charge of interrupted intimacy. Cale stared into Xylia's wide, luminous eyes, seeing his own bewildered desire reflected there. The absurdity of his fleeting panic, where does what go, felt monumentally stupid now, faced with the raw connection humming between them. He reached up, gently cupping her face, his thumb stroking the smooth, scaled surface just below her eye. "Sorry," he murmured, though he wasn't sure what he was apologizing for. The panic. The interruption. The sheer species gap awkwardness. Xylia leaned into his touch, her lights softening from the intense flare to a warm, steady glow. Her resonant hum settled, losing its frantic edge, becoming a low, inquisitive thrum again. She tilted her head, pressing her cheek more firmly against his palm. One of her tendrils came up, gently tracing the lines on his hand, then mimicking his gesture, cupping his cheek. The touch was cool, smooth, yet sent waves of warmth through him. It felt like forgiveness, understanding, or maybe just a mutual acknowledgement of the strangeness, the newness of it all. There was no shared language for this, no cultural script. They were mapping each other, sensation by sensation, resonance by resonance. His earlier panic faded, replaced by a renewed wave of tenderness and intense curiosity. He leaned in again, slower this time, his forehead resting against hers. He closed his eyes, focusing on the sensations, the coolness of her scales, the faint vibration of her hum against his skull, the low thrumming in his own chest that seemed to answer hers. It felt like attunement, like tuning forks resonating together. Xylia sighed, a soft exhalation of air that brushed against his skin. Her tendrils curled more firmly around him, pulling him into a closer embrace. Her body felt alien yet perfectly right against his, the smooth planes of her scaled torso, the unexpected strength in her slender limbs, the way her tendrils seemed to anticipate his shifts in weight, supporting him. He slid his hands under her light vest-like garment, his fingers finding the warm skin and intricate patterns of scales beneath. She shivered, her lights pulsing brightly under his touch, her hum deepening into a sound of pure pleasure that vibrated through both of them. This wasn't just physical exploration anymore. It felt deeper, more significant. He wasn't just touching an alien body, he was connecting with Xylia. He found the seam of her mouth again, kissing her gently, reverently. She responded eagerly, her own small mouth parting, meeting his tentative explorations with a surprising heat. Her tendrils moved over his back, stripping away the layers of his flight suit with deft, quick movements until his chest was bare against her scales. The contact was electric, skin against scale, warmth against cool smoothness. Her lights flowed like liquid mercury over her skin, reacting to his touch, mirroring the pleasure arching through him. He lifted her easily, she was lighter than she looked, and carried her the few steps to the narrow bunk built into the aft bulkhead of the cockpit. He laid her down gently, her luminous eyes never leaving his. The space was small, forcing them into close proximity, bodies tangled, limbs intertwining. Human and Cathar, rough fabric and smooth scales, warm skin and cool bioluminescence. The contrast was intoxicating. He kissed her again, deeper this time, losing himself in the alien sweetness, the shared resonance that built between them, a silent song of discovery and surrender. Her tendrils explored his body with an intensity that bordered on worship, learning his lines and textures, leaving trails of tingling warmth in their wake. He responded in kind, his hands mapping the sleek contours of her form, discovering the sensitive ridges along her spine, the soft vulnerability where her tendrils met her shoulders. Every touch sparked a flare of light, every shared breath deepened the hum that enveloped them. There was no panic now, only a profound sense of rightness, an acceptance of the unknown, a surrender to the connection that transcended species, language, and the vast emptiness of space outside their small haven. The hours passed in a haze of shared discovery and deepening intimacy. Kale learned the language of Xylia's body not through words, but through the shifting intensity of her bioluminescence, the pitch and rhythm of her resonant hum, the electric response of her skin and tendrils to his touch. She, in turn, seemed fascinated by the textures and heat of his human form, her touches often lingering, analytical yet filled with a palpable sense of wonder. There were moments of awkwardness, fumbles born from anatomical difference, but they dissolved quickly into shared glances or soft, resonant chuckles from Xylia that Kale felt more than heard. Her pleasure was a visible, audible thing, light flaring across her scales, hums deepening into resonant moans that vibrated against his skin, tendrils tightening around him in involuntary contractions. His own release was explosive, amplified by the alien sensations, the sheer intensity of the resonant connection that peaked with him, leaving him gasping, trembling, utterly spent but more grounded than he'd felt in years. Afterwards, they lay tangled together on the narrow bunk, the comet's engines humming softly now that the power cells were partially recharged, the jungle moon's eerie glow painting shifting patterns across their joined bodies. Xylia rested her head on his chest, one tendril gently tracing patterns over his heart, her lights a soft, contented azure pulse. Her hum was a low, steady thrum, peaceful and sated. Kale stroked her smooth, scaled back, feeling the rhythmic rise and fall of her breathing. The guarded walls he'd spent years building felt distant, irrelevant. He felt exposed, vulnerable, but not afraid. "You know," he murmured, his voice rough, "this complicates things." Xylia lifted her head, her nebula eyes searching his. The hum shifted, becoming questioning. "Staying alive out here, it's easier alone," he explained, trying to articulate the fear that gnawed at the edges of his contentment. "Attachments are liabilities, especially when people are hunting you." He didn't know if she understood the words, but she seemed to grasp the sentiment. She pressed her palm flat against his chest again, her lights pulsing gently. Then she tapped her own chest, then his, then made a gesture that encompassed the small cockpit, the ship itself. Her hum became firm, resolute. "Here, together." She nudged his chin with a tendril, urging him to look at her. Her expression, conveyed through the intensity of her gaze and the subtle shift of light patterns, was serious, unwavering. She tapped the spot on his shoulder where the syndicate weapon blast had nearly taken him out in the asteroid field. Then she tapped herself where she'd taken the brunt of the Predator's initial attack. The message was clear: we protect each other. Kale looked into those vast, luminous eyes and saw not just an alien but a partner. Someone fierce, resilient, and unexpectedly gentle. Someone who had faced danger for him beside him. The fear didn't vanish entirely, but it was overshadowed by a stronger, warmer emotion. Hope. Connection. He pulled her closer, burying his face in the cool smoothness of her shoulder, inhaling her faint, clean scent ozone and something faintly metallic. "Yeah," he whispered. "Okay, together." Xylia's resonant hum deepened with satisfaction, a warm vibration that settled deep in his soul. She curled against him, her tendrils wrapping loosely around his torso, a possessive, protective embrace. In the quiet hum of the ship, surrounded by the alien jungle, Kale drifted towards sleep, not alone, but fundamentally, irrevocably linked to the impossible, glowing creature beside him. The future was uncertain, dangerous even, but for the first time in a long time, he wasn't facing it alone. They lifted off from Xylos under the cover of its thick ionosphere, the rusty comet recharged and marginally less likely to fall apart. A fragile sense of normalcy, or at least a new normal, settled over the ship. Kale found himself unconsciously adjusting his movements in the tight corridors to avoid bumping Xylia, while she seemed to learn his routines, anticipating when he'd need access to a certain console or retrieve something from storage. Communication evolved. Kale picked up more nuances in her resonance and light patterns, a quick flicker of emerald green for curiosity, a slow pulse of violet for contemplation, a sharp spike of crimson for annoyance, usually when he misplaced his hydrospanner again. Xylia, in turn, began to mimic the cadence of his spoken words more accurately, occasionally producing a surprisingly clear syllable or two, though stringing sentences together was still beyond her. She seemed to learn best through touch and observation. Kale started teaching her basic ship functions, guiding her scaled hands over the controls. Her tendrils proved incredibly adept at fine manipulation, making delicate adjustments to power conduits he usually struggled with. One cycle, he found her in the pilot's seat, tendrils gently resting on the yoke, her lights pulsing softly as she stared out at the starfield, mimicking the posture she'd seen him adopt countless times. He leaned against the doorway, watching her, thinking of a career change. He asked lightly. She turned, her nebula eyes bright. She tapped the pilot's seat, then herself, then made a complex humming sound that felt like a question about navigation. "Maybe later," he chuckled. "Let's master left and right first." He came up behind her, placing his hands over hers on the yoke. "This," he guided her hand slightly, "banks us port." He felt the familiar tingle as their skin contacted, but now it was underscored by a deep thrum of connection, a shared resonance that felt as natural as breathing. Xylia hummed in understanding, her tendrils lightly brushing his arms as she focused intently on the controls and his explanation. These quiet moments of shared learning and casual intimacy became the fabric of their days as they drifted through uncharted space, avoiding major hyperspace lanes, conserving fuel. They shared meals, Kale with his rations, Xylia absorbing nutrient paste, though she occasionally took curious, tiny bites of his food, her lights flaring with surprise at new flavors. They learned each other's rhythms, preferences, boundaries. Kale discovered Xylia loved the warmth of the engine core, observed from a safe distance, while she seemed perpetually fascinated by the old, dog-eared synth paper novels he kept stashed away, tracing the strange glyphs with a glowing tendril as if trying to absorb the stories. But the shadow of the syndicate, of whatever Xylia was running from, lingered. Every unidentified ship on the long-range scanner sent a jolt of anxiety through Kale. Xylia, too, would grow still, her lights dimming, her resonance dropping whenever an unknown energy signature appeared. One cycle, while running a deep space diagnostic, a proximity alert pinged. Not close, but definitely there. A single vessel running cold, trying to mask its signature. Kale's blood ran cold. They found us again. Xylia was instantly beside him, her posture tense, lights shifting to a wary amber. She pressed a hand to the sensor console, humming low, her tendrils analyzing the faint energy readings. One ship her resonance seemed to confirm. Small, fast. Mercenary, Kale guessed. Or maybe just scouts. Xylia's lights flickered towards the Cygnus Vale coordinates still logged in the nav computer. Then she looked at him, her expression grim. Her hum conveyed a sense of inevitability. Hunters. Not syndicate regulars, perhaps, but professionals hired to track her. Kale said, his jaw tight. Running won't work forever. We need a place to disappear, somewhere messy. He pulled up star charts, zooming in on the outer rim territories. Port Azure is out, but maybe the Ghost Nebula. Sensor interference is hell. Pirates use it for cover. Risky, but better than being caught out here. Xylia studied the swirling, chaotic image of the nebula. She tapped the screen, then looked at him, her resonance a mix of caution and agreement. Danger, but necessary. Kale met her gaze, a silent understanding passing between them. Their quiet interlude was over. It was time to fight or vanish. The Ghost Nebula lived up to its name. Turbulent rivers of charged gas twisted around fields of sensor-ghosting debris and pockets of gravitational anomaly. Flying through it was like navigating rapids blindfolded. The rusty comet bucked and groaned, alarms flashing constantly as Kale wrestled with the controls, sweat dripping down his temples. Xylia sat beside him, one hand braced on the console, the other resting lightly on his shoulder, her resonant hum a steady counterpoint to the chaos outside, surprisingly calming. Her tendrils occasionally darted out, making micro-adjustments to shield harmonics or coolant flow, anticipating problems before the ship's limited VI even registered them. They were a team now, moving with an unspoken synchronicity born of shared danger and intimacy. The hunter ship was still behind them, smaller and more agile, navigating the nebula with unnerving skill. They couldn't shake it. They're good, Kale gritted out, executing a tight, stomach-lurching turn around a chunk of crystalline debris. Too good for standard mercs. K-Thar, Xylia suddenly spoke, the word clear, sharp, resonating with a chilling familiarity. Kale glanced at her, startled. What? They're your people? Xylia shook her head, her lights flashing a negative red. No. She tapped her own chest, then made a gesture indicating other, apart. Her hum turned low, filled with something akin to bitterness. Exiles, hunters, trackers. So her own species was hunting her. That explained their skill, their persistence. And it made their situation infinitely more dangerous. The hunter ship emerged from behind a swirling gas cloud, closing fast, weapons ports glowing. They're lining up for a shot, Kale yelled. Shields won't take another direct hit. Xylia acted without hesitation. She launched herself from the co-pilot seat, moving towards the aft compartment where Kale kept the emergency power conduits exposed for quick repairs. Xylia, what are you? Before he could finish, she placed her palms flat against the main conduits. Her entire body lit up like a star, bioluminescence blazing with unbearable intensity. The resonant hum spiked, shaking the entire ship, overloading the sensors. Power surged through the comet systems, shields flared to maximum, engines roared with borrowed energy, even the flickering cabin lights shone with blinding brilliance. It was too much power, raw and uncontrolled. Warning klaxons screamed about imminent core overload. "Xylia, stop! You'll kill yourself. You'll blow us both up," Kale shouted, fighting to keep the supercharged ship from tearing itself apart. Outside, the hunter ship, caught off guard by the massive energy surge and the comet's sudden burst of speed and maneuverability, fired. The bolt struck the overloaded shields and dissipated harmlessly. Kale used the power surge, ramming the throttle forward, diving deep into a dense, crackling plasma stream that would fry the sensors of any pursuing vessel. He risked a glance back. Xylia was slumped against the conduits, her lights flickering weakly, dangerously dim. Her resonance was a faint, thready pulse. He cut the power boost, leveling off inside the plasma stream's temporary cover. He engaged the autopilot, ignoring the screaming warnings, and rushed back to her. "Xylia," he carefully pulled her away from the conduits. Her scales felt cold, her body limp. Her eyes were closed. Panic seized him. "Don't do this. Don't you dare leave me now," he choked out, gathering her into his arms. He carried her back to the cockpit, laying her gently on the deck plating. Her breathing was shallow, the soft pulse of light on her skin barely visible. He remembered the Predator on Xylos, how she had poured her energy into it. This was different. This was self-sacrifice. He knelt beside her, helpless. He touched her face, her shoulder, trying to share his own warmth, his own energy, though he knew it was useless. "Come on, Sparkles," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Come back." He pressed his forehead against hers, closing his eyes, focusing all his will, all his desperate hope, pouring his own silent resonance towards her, mirroring the connection she had forged with him. "Stay, please stay." For a long moment there was nothing. Then a faint flicker. A single tendril twitched, brushing against his hand. A soft, incredibly weak hum answered his own, a barely audible vibration against his skin. Her eyes fluttered open, hazy and unfocused, but undeniably seeing him. A wave of relief washed over Kale, so intense it left him dizzy. She was alive. Weak, depleted, but alive. He held her gaze, pouring all his unspoken emotion into that look. Together. Her lights pulsed faintly, a weak echo of her usual brilliance, but it was enough. It was everything. They had survived. They had protected each other. And in the heart of the chaotic nebula, surrounded by danger, their bond felt stronger, more unbreakable than ever. They drifted for days in the deepest, most sensor-dead pocket of the ghost nebula Kale could find, letting the comet systems slowly repair themselves and Xylia recover her strength. He tended to her constantly, bringing her nutrient paste which she absorbed slowly, monitoring her faint biosigns, talking to her quietly even when she mostly slept. He recounted stories from his misspent youth, described planets he'd visited, humming badly remembered tunes. He didn't know if she understood, but her lights would sometimes pulse faintly in response, her weak hum vibrating softly against his hand when he held hers. Gradually, her light returned, the azure glow strengthening, the intricate patterns becoming clearer. Her resonance regained its depth, shifting from the thready pulse of near death to the familiar, inquisitive, and affectionate thrums he'd come to know. One cycle he woke from a light doze in the pilot's seat to find her standing beside him, watching him, her nebula eyes clear and bright. She looked fragile still, but undeniably her. She reached out, tracing the worry lines on his forehead with a gentle tendril. Her hum was soft, questioning, concerned for him. "I'm okay," he said, his voice thick. He reached up, covering her hand with his own. "Just glad you're back, Sparkles." She leaned down, pressing her forehead to his in the now familiar gesture of intimate connection. Her resonance flowed into him, warm, steady, full of an emotion that transcended language, relief, gratitude, and a deep, abiding affection that settled directly into his soul. Together, the resonance affirmed, stronger than ever. They stayed hidden in the nebula until their supplies ran dangerously low and Kale was reasonably sure the Cathar hunters had lost their trail or given up. The question was, where next? "We can't keep running forever," Kale said one cycle, studying the star charts spread across the console. "They know what you are now, they know how to track you, maybe." Xylia came up beside him, resting a hand on his shoulder. She looked at the charts, then tapped a region far beyond the outer rim, deep in uncharted territory. New, unknown. A place where perhaps the past couldn't reach them. It was a gamble, a huge one. Resources would be scarce, dangers unknown. But it offered something they desperately needed, a chance. A fresh start away from syndicates and Cathar hunters. Just us? Kale asked, looking at her. Xylia met his gaze, her luminous eyes unwavering. She tapped his chest, then hers. Her resonant hum was clear, certain. Us. He took a deep breath, the scent of ozone and her unique alien fragrance filling his senses. He thought of his old life, the running, the debts, the loneliness. It felt like a lifetime ago. Looking at Xylia, at the impossible, beautiful creature who had crashed into his life and fundamentally changed it, the choice was simple. Terrifying, but simple. Okay, he said, a slow smile spreading across his face. Uncharted territory it is. Just try not to blow up the ship again, saving my ass, all right. My nerves can't take it. Xylia's lights flickered with amusement, and her resonant hum turned playful, almost teasing. She leaned in, pressing a soft, quick kiss to the corner of his mouth before pulling back, her eyes sparkling. He inputted the coordinates for the jump, a destination known only to the two of them. As the nav computer calculated the trajectory into the unknown, Kale reached out, taking Xylia's hand. Her scaled fingers interlaced with his, cool meeting warm, light flaring at the point of contact. They stood together, watching the starfield prepare to warp, not just pilot and stowaway, human and alien, but partners bound by shared danger, unexpected intimacy, and the silent, resonant promise of a future they would build together, one uncharted star system at a time. The ship surged forward, plunging into hyperspace, leaving the ghosts of the past behind as they raced towards a new beginning.